Welcome to another LinkedIn Live. This is Paul Palmer. As usual, I'm going to give everybody a couple of minutes to join. So let's give you some different intro this time. What have we done before? What we talked about. I started in 1986. What I often don't share is before I joined the pharmaceutical industry in 1986, I was actually working in a dispensary. I was working part-time in a dispensary, a couple of different locations, as a dispenser. And it was in my father's dispensary, and I used to ask him all the questions about all the drugs. And interestingly, he answered me every time. He was a pharmacist for, I don't know, 40 years or something. A long time anyway. I've been in the pharmaceutical industry now 40 years this year. I started in microbiology, then QC, then QA, auditing. This isn't really in order now, is it? QP, RP, RPI, that's more recent. Quality systems manager. I suppose the bit that's most important, the bit that's more interesting is the QP side. I've been a practicing QP now since 2004, which is 22 years. That's right. Yeah, 22 years as a QP, named on a license. I've noticed a lot of QPs, when they get to about 30 years, they continue and they progress up to higher levels, and they stop being named on the license. They stop doing the release. But what I like about continuing is I continue in the role of QP. It keeps me up to date. I'm required to keep up to date. People ask me questions and I research them. So it's quite nice continuing to practice. So today we're talking about why QA assigns data that they don't understand. Imagine you put your name on something, sign it at the bottom. Imagine you sign a contract to sell a house, but you didn't realize that you actually bought a flat and now you're liable. Well, when you sign as a quality assurance professional on a document, the same principle applies. You're then liable. You're signing to say, yes, I approve it, I agree with it. Whatever it is on that document that it's saying that your signature is there for, you're signing at that time and probably dating to say that you've confirmed, approved, verified the data, made sure that it's all correct, that it's followed the SOP, and that it complies. That's probably the one that's more important in many cases. But a lot of the time, people just sign it because there's a section there to sign it. Yeah, all the boxes are filled in. Let's just sign it off. Well, that's not really the idea behind having a QA approval on a document. So let's talk about it a little bit, shall we? And why the inspectors hate it when a QA person just signs. So signing doesn't demonstrate control. QA signatures are routinely treated as evidence of adequate review. But a signature is only meaningful when the reviewer genuinely understands the data that they signed for. So similar to what I was talking about with the house, if you've got a document that you've reviewed, make sure that you actually understand what it is in the content that you're reviewing before you sign. Because if you're not, then the signature means nothing. If your signature means nothing, then it brings it into question in all the documents you've approved. So bear that in mind next time as a QA person you sign a document. Now, what about everybody else? Well, the signature means whatever it's there for. So if a production person signs, they're signing to say, yes, we've done that activity. So they're in exactly the same position. Now, inspectors are experienced at distinguishing real scientific oversight from somebody that's just box ticking. Complex analytical and manufacturing data can't be reviewed superficially. You have to actually look at what it is that you're doing. You have to do the calculations. You have to do the reconciliation calculation. You have to do the verification that what they've actually put in lines up, that it actually makes sense. So when you're looking at your data integrity checks, make sure you do the full list, the full assessment. QA approved doesn't automatically mean that QA has understood it, but they should. And that's what we're talking about today. So there's often a complexity gap. Often the QA person has actually read the SOP, but didn't really understand what was going to be happening. Maybe they understand the technical addition and subtraction in the calculation, but they should have gone and looked at the process and gained specialist knowledge of what was actually going on, or maybe the analytical method. Often there's a work pressure, there's a workload pressure, because most of the time, quality teams will be understaffed. Why? Well, there's a lack of quality people, and it's an overhead. An overhead is a cost. It's not a benefit, but actually compliance is a benefit. So you've got a conflict there between the business and the priority to actually maintain compliance. But bear in mind, if you're not compliant, you've got no business. Heavy workloads drive checklist-driven review instead of detailed, analytical, technical review. Organizations sometimes combine independence with technical detachment. Well, if you're technically detached and you don't understand, and you're doing an independent review, well, all you're really doing is checking that it's been filled in, that every box has got a signature in it, not necessarily that the calculation has been done properly, which is what you should be doing. And then, of course, there's training gaps. Majority of training that I see at the moment focuses on compliance with the SOP, but often misses the opportunity to explain the interpretation of the data that's actually being generated. And then it becomes a habit. Yeah, they filled it in. Yeah, it looks about right. Yeah, we'll just sign that off and move on to the next one, because somebody else will pick it up if there's a problem. But what if they don't? What if the strength actually was double and you didn't pick it up because you didn't really understand what that calculation meant? What if your sign-off then allows that product to go to market as a QA person? And do you remember the one recently, the cough medicine, where was it 84 children died? What if that was because of your signature? How would that make you feel, signing something off and being responsible for patient harm? So you need to understand everything that you're signing for. So when we're looking at a quality assurance signature, when we're talking about a sign-off, an approval at the bottom of the page, what does it really mean? Well, procedural compliance. The activities performed according to the approved procedure. Often that also implies that the procedure was actually correct as well, which too often they're not. And people are just signing because they've got to sign, rather than signing to say, yes, we've done it right. What about data integrity? Everything's there, consistent, scientifically credible. The record accurately represents what happened. Now think about that. Accurately represents what happened now, contemporaneously. Where are we up to? It's not pre-filled and it's not post-filled. It's filled in at the time. Scientific defensibility. Well, really, this is about being able to reconstruct that any deviations that have been created are addressed. Critical parameters have been met. Decisions supported by evidence. But really, all the primary data is there. Everything is filled in the way it's supposed to be by trained personnel, competent personnel. They've done the job, they've signed it off, they've filled the records in the way they're supposed to, at the time they're supposed to, not filling a gap later. Data review needs understanding. To understand, what do you need? Well, competence. The person that's reviewing the data needs to be competent to understand what they're actually reviewing so that they can verify and say, yes, that is correct. Yes, I've done an independent review, and I confirm, yes, the actual results are correct. The data integrity is correct. The SOP has been followed. It's been done at the time. You need to think about purpose of what it is. Understand what it's meant to demonstrate. Ask whether the data actually makes sense. Is it credible? If there's an audit trail, because it's digital data, you need to look and make sure that the metadata lines up, that nobody's actually messed up, nobody's tampered with the evidence. See if there's a trend. Is there something telling us we're going out of range? Or have we got more variability or maybe less variability than we normally do? And this is all through a competent review of the data. Effective review is not just verifying the numbers are in spec. You need to be able to distinguish normal variation, something not normal, something abnormal, something out of range that you would normally expect. You can see a trend that matters even when individual results pass. I used to look and see trends before it even come out from the computer system. I could say, oh yeah, that's outside the normal range. I don't really do that so much now because we have systems in place. We have out of spec analysis. We have AI. We have out of trend data. But probably more because we've trained the people I work with to be competent in their review process. If you assess metadata, audit trails, don't just look at the final values. Actually assess it. Does it seem right? Does it align with what your expectations were for that data? And of course, context. Context is a really important one because a piece of data in one place is going to mean something else in a different place. So let's think. If we've got a temperature of 8 degrees C, no, let's have a temperature of 10 degrees C. Is that a pass? Well, if we're in a cold chain at 2 to 8, it's a fail. It's too high. If we're in controlled ambient 15 to 25, it's failed because it's too low. If we're in uncontrolled below 30, well, it's passed because it's below 30. But is it out of trend when we normally see results between 20 and 25? Maybe it is. Maybe you still need to investigate because it's not normal. It's not what we normally see. So be careful. When you do review data, don't just look at compliance with the specification, because you might be able to identify something that's going wrong before it actually impacts the product, before it goes wrong, before it causes a failure and a reject. So maybe we've got some red flags that the inspectors notice. We can't explain why we accepted something. Can't literally say, oh, well, this unusual result was acceptable because they just signed it off. Well, they said because it met the spec. But what was wrong? Why was it different? Maybe somebody put something in they shouldn't have, or they missed something. Doing a tick box review is primarily checking signatures, completion boxes, but without looking at the content. Did it flow the way it was expected to? Were the signatures in the right order? Was it the right person? Did somebody else fill it in afterwards when he'd left because he'd forgotten and they wanted to get it out? If they did, have they made a note of that? No documented challenge. Atypical results are accepted without recorded questioning or scientific justification. This is a bit more of the same thing, really. Because if your results are out of range, then you do something about it. Even if that's a decision to say, yes, it's acceptable still. And then we've got deferred judgment. Reviewers entirely relying on originating department's explanation and not thinking about it. Then their approval is administrative rather than scientific. Oh yeah, they said it was all right, so it must be. They're the specialists. They're the ones that have got all the skills, so it must be okay. And as a QP, that does frustrate me when people say, oh yeah, they're the specialists, they're the subject matter experts, so that what they've said must be okay. But sometimes it isn't. Sometimes they haven't reconsidered what it could be, what the issue might be, what issue the results might be raising. Sorry about that. Danger of within spec thinking. This I see a lot. A reviewer must look beyond the numbers and think, well, it's in spec, but it's 10 times what it is normally, or it's way lower than the previous one. Passing a spec limit doesn't confirm the process is healthy or in control. Unexpected shifts could be a sign that the process is developing a problem that you could fix before it really becomes a problem. Like when you're driving your car, you notice a noise underneath. You stop and you have a look. Your exhaust pipe's about to fall on the floor. But you don't have to buy a new one because you stopped and you tie it up with something. Well, if you do that to your process, you stop and you fix the problem. You get the engineering where you can continue manufacture rather than a bearing going maybe and you being down for the next 2 days. Out of trend results are often visible before and out of specification. They shouldn't be ignored. An out of trend result can be a gradual drift, or it can be a step change. The easy ones to spot are the step changes. There's usually an underlying root cause that you can then address to bring it back down and actually have compliant results going forwards, compliant products to release, rather than a batch that you have to rework or reject. Repeat reprocessing, or adjustments could be masking instability of a process. So often you'll find that the reprocessing is allowed, but maybe it's allowed once. Sterilization, for example, you're allowed to reprocess once if you've put that in the registration. Often you're not allowed to reprocess more than once. But if you're doing it every time, oh yeah, we can do it, so let's reprocess, then maybe you're not fixing that air bubble that's at the top, or the sub-quality, poor quality steam that's not actually achieving the right temperature, or the leak that you've got on your chamber that everybody's just ignoring. But you can see it each time it closes. Is the result credible? Instead of, did it pass? What about technical understanding? Where does it matter? Why does it matter the most? Well, some review activities carry more scientific complexity, and as a result, there's a greater risk if they're just reviewed superficially. So let's go through some examples. Analytical and chromatographic data. Well, chromatographic is analytical, but look at your peak integration, your system suitability, method performance. Well, if somebody's just looking at the graph, does it look right? Does it look the same as last time? They're not going to notice that shoulder on the peak, maybe the API, and you've got some degradation product in there, which is actually affecting your assay. Maybe they will. Maybe they will notice. Then we've got environmental and microbiological monitoring, which I did it for 6 years in the macro lab, and I've been doing it ever since. Trend evaluation, exceeding the alert or action limits in controlled environments. Well, alert limits, you can take some action, but once it goes above the action, usually that means you've failed and you've got some product in the bin. But if somebody's there and they see a mold and the QA review and they say, oh, we've got a mold, but it's only 1 and the limit's 10, so it's okay. And then the next day they come back and they've got another mold. Oh, it's only 1 and the action limit's 10. So we're okay. Then the next day they come back and they've got 12. Well, if they'd done something about it the first time and informed the people doing the manufacturing, they could have done a swab. They could have done a sanitization process, probably using a sporicide. And they wouldn't have gone out of spec, and they wouldn't have put that product in the bin. Process, cleaning validation, continued process verification data, life cycle assessments and residue limits are all things that we think about when we're setting a process up, aren't they? But what if you could actually think about it in real time as you go along? And because you've seen that process every day, you can actually see that something's not quite right, or that your residue results on your swabs are coming out a little bit higher every day, that the process itself is not quite right, that the duration for the main phase is coming 2 minutes longer than it usually does. Maybe you've spotted a problem that could be fixed in advance before it becomes a problem for the process. Audit trails, computerized systems. Well, when we have so many electronic records, metadata integrity is really important. So we have to make sure that we're looking at the audit trails to make sure nobody's done some sort of amendment. I was going to say tampering with it, but I just mean amendments. And then we've got system configuration controls. This is becoming more and more important, because if a system's configured for one test and you're doing a different test, well, it may be that the result that you get is completely invalid, but just by luck it's in spec. What you really wanted to look at was the validity of the data to make sure the results that you've got demonstrate that the product is acceptable, not out of spec. So what should a reviewer do when they don't understand? Well, stop, acknowledge the knowledge gap, honestly, ask, probably a subject matter expert. Challenge questions, assumptions, conclusions. Do they actually make sense against the information that was presented? And if they've got something they're not sure of, escalate. Don't necessarily just approve because you're being asked to. Don't approve it until it's defendable. Assuming technical competence where it does not exist is a regulatory liability. And if somebody doesn't understand, they should be the one saying, sorry, I don't get that. I do it all the time. Sorry, I don't get that. Can you just go through it again? The appropriate response is structured, professional, and documented, not avoidance. If you're not sure about something, raise it. I'm not clear about that. Is there any chance that I could get some more training? So what do we do to build a competent QA review? Define what the knowledge requirements are. The person in QA should know this. Map the technical competencies for each review activity, not just procedural familiarity. Do they actually understand what it is they're looking at? Have they done it before? Train more than just the forms. Invest in data interpretation, trend analysis, scientific reasoning, not just SOP compliance. It's interesting because when I read this, when I was going through my final review before presenting this, I realized back in 1992, maybe 91, when the company I was working for sent me on a statistics course, they weren't just doing it for my benefit. They were doing it so that I could actually understand the process capability work that they were doing on a project to implement SPC throughout the whole site. And guess what? I was next on the project because they trained me. So I knew what I was looking for. I knew how to make the recommendations, what they needed to do with the process next, and the process controls that they should be putting in place because I've been trained. And I've used it a lot of times since. Use your subject matter experts strategically. Get them in without surrendering, without changing your QA independence or deferring judgment entirely. Yes, ask them, but don't just assume because they say one thing. that that's the whole story. And of course, assess review effectiveness. Did it do the job that it was supposed to do? Evaluate whether QA review is genuinely challenging the data, and encourage difficult questions without operational pressure. If something's not right, they should be challenging it. They should be saying, well, it's not quite the same as it does normally. Why? What's going wrong? And of course, in a QA role, you never sign what you can't justify. As a QP, I know this more than anyone. I would never put my name to something that wasn't appropriate. If you can't explain why the data is acceptable, you're not reviewing them. You're just decorating the paperwork. The regulatory reality is inspectors may ask the reviewer directly to explain and defend their approval decision. The lab said it was acceptable is not an appropriate defense. It's not enough. So what's the standard that you need to hold to? Well, a QA signature should demonstrate informed, independent judgment, not merely that the form was completed and the deadline was met. Think about that. Judgment. Independent assessment. Independent judgment. Yes, it's okay. I've verified and everything's fine. Make sure you have. But more importantly, make sure you understood what it was you're verifying. So that's it for me for today. I hope you found this useful. And I'd like to invite you to come to the website, academypharmaceuticalexcellence.com, and get in touch for any training that you might need. I'd also like you to connect with me on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/in/Paul R. Palmer. The easy way to find me, just search Paul R. Palmer, of course. Unless you're already watching on LinkedIn and we're already connected. And then there's YouTube, youtube.com/ now it does have that little @ sign, Paul R. Palmer. Now you'll find that by using that @ Paul R. Palmer, you go straight to the channel and you'll find all the history of the lives that I've done. All of them, literally, going back, I can't actually remember how long now. And then, of course, there's email, info@academypharmaceuticalexcellence.com. And I do hope that you'll get in touch by one of the means, I don't mind which one, and that we can have a chat. And hopefully you found this useful, maybe even inspiring.